You're watching Local Access, Channel 29, exclusive programming for Comcast subscribers.
Welcome to Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley, and you're watching a program sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida. Terrorism. Is terrorism religiously motivated? Is it a tactic? Is it a political propaganda scheme? What do the terrorists want? Why do they hate us? And why do we preface the word terrorism with Islamic so often? There are many types of terrorists in the world, and they're not all Islamic, and terrorism is not based in the Islam religion. And here today to talk with us about terrorism is the chairman of the Council of American Islamic Relations, Dr. Parvez Ahmed. Doctor, it's so good to have you back to Civil Discourse. I appreciate this very, very much. You've become a national figure now. When you were last on this program about 2 years ago, you were the chairman, I believe, of the state of Florida, right, and you have since received a promotion, as it were. You must have been out of the room, perhaps, when that vote was taken. But here you are on a national stage dealing with the American Islamic Relations. It's a great title for your organization. Talk a little bit, if you would, about CAIR. That's the acronym, C-A-I-R. What are its goals, and what do you perceive are some of the obstacles that you encounter in your travels around the country now?
Yeah, CAIR is a Muslim advocacy group primarily dedicated to advocating the civil liberties of American Muslims. It was established in 1994. It's headquartered in Washington, D.C. It has 33 offices and chapters around the country. American Muslims make up about 6 to 8 million today in America. There are about 6 to 8 million Muslims in America. So CAIR is a voice for those American Muslims, promoting their issues primarily with respect to civil liberties, but also sometimes in areas such as foreign policy and other issues.
Civil liberties is an interesting phrase. I mean, I'm part of the American Civil Liberties Union, and you are too. You were also on the state of Florida Board of Directors for the American Civil Liberties Union.
And it's a great privilege to serve.
Well, it's great to have you. You bring a sense of diversity and a perspective that is very much needed. But when we say civil liberties, a lot of people don't understand what that means. And some people say, oh, that's not a good thing, actually. People don't seem to get what civil rights are and civil liberties are.
Well, it's the most distinguishing element of the American society, is our Bill of Rights. It's a document that most countries do not have the privilege of basing their society upon. But our society is based upon those civil rights, that Bill of Rights, which has allowed us to overcome our own social injustices, whether it's slavery, whether it's segregation, whether it's women's rights, whether it is minority rights, voting rights, torture, coercion of testimony, and all of these things that can become part of the human experience and are part of human experience, whether in this country historically or maybe even now or in other societies. And the document that allows us to move beyond and move towards civility, as your program says, civil discourse,
right?
move towards civility, is our Bill of Rights. So it is a document that all Americans should be very proud of and cherish and work to defend.
Well, it sets up a dynamic between the majority who go to the polls and elect our representatives, who then create laws for the rest of us. But the Bill of Rights sets up a wall, if you will. It sets up an obstacle. It sets up a parameter in which the majority, the government, cannot do certain things to an individual or to the minority. It actually is very unique in the world. And we, as much as we struggle as a nation with trying to get it right, and we do struggle, and that's part of the process and part of the fun for me, trying to engage and try to affect change, there are mistakes. I mean, when the Constitution was written, it was a discriminatory document. It was basically only white male men who were property owners of a certain status, who had the rights to vote and who could engage. But over the 2 centuries, we have worked very diligently to remove all of those obstacles to the minorities. We no longer have slavery. Black men can vote, women can vote, and we're working slowly but surely to more of an equal footing under the law.
Yeah, and I think that's what on the context of promoting democracy in Middle East, I think the fallacy of that dream is that, or that policy, is that we are talking about democracy, but we are not talking about civil society. The prerequisite, or you can say the fundamental of a democratic society, is a civil society, which means it is not just the rule of the majority, because if it's a rule of the majority, it will inevitably become the tyranny of the majority. But it is also the protection of the minority rights and the equality of all citizens that the system has to serve everybody equally.
Now, your organization is Council on American Islamic Relations. Focus a little bit about what it is to be Islamic. What is Islam? I've learned from having been invited to something that you do called Sharing Ramadan, which is something very interesting. You actually advertise this, you put print ads in newspapers, you go on television, and invite the entire community over to the mosque on St. John's Bluff Road, and you're willing to feed whoever shows up. Now, a lot of churches are, have outreach programs too, but this is something that I think some people are not even aware of. So what is it to be American Islamic relations?
Well, it's great to be a Muslim in this country because of this, precisely what we were talking about. Because of our U.S. Constitution, because of the Bill of Rights, it gives us the privilege of practicing our religion the way we see it best. And that is, again, the distinguishing characteristic of the American society. It is built on the foundation of freedom of religion. Freedom of religion not dictated by any group, but as perceived by the individual. And that gives Muslims a lot of leeway in this country to practice the religion the way they feel best suits their needs or suits their viewpoints. That is sometimes not the case even in Muslim majority countries. So as a Muslim living in this country, I believe I have the freedom to practice religion more than I would have had in other Muslim societies. So it's a great privilege to be an American, and a great honor and a great sense of responsibility to work in a way to make sure that American values, America's image in the Muslim countries are also right. The part that is the most difficult for American Muslims right now is 2 things. One is the civil liberties issues post 9/11 because of the Patriot Act and other kinds of government excesses. There's been continuous erosion of those civil liberties in general, but particularly to the American Muslim experience.
Well, 2 other examples are the NSA illegal warrantless wiretapping,
the recent passage of the MCA, the Commissions Act. These are just unbelievable that we are living through a time where we have, in essence, done away with habeas corpus, something that has been the fundamental cornerstone of Western civilization, at least for the last 200 years. It is amazing.
And habeas corpus is the ability to challenge the detention of an individual before some judiciary body. Habeas corpus is Latin for you have the body, and I think you may have the body incorrectly. What happens when they make a mistake? If you don't have the ability to go and challenge that, what do you do? How do you correct it?
And that is, to me, that is also an Islamic value. It is not something that you cannot, every individual from the Islamic perspective is that if somebody is being charged with something, it is the responsibility of the group that is charging them to produce the evidence against them.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be, an evidence cannot be considered evidence if it is done in some secret corner, because then it is susceptible to manipulation and all kinds of problems. It has to be done in open, it makes common sense that evidence has to be presented in public.
Now you're back to our Bill of Rights. That's all the due process that we say but that's the process that we say is due to people who are detained by our government. And it's important. You should be confronted with the evidence. You're confronted with your accuser, the right to defend yourself, the right to a speedy trial, the right to an attorney. These are all things that Americans are inherently due.
And this is one of the biggest problems that we see in many Muslim societies. And if America wants to advocate for fairness and justice, which should be, because this is the distinguishing characteristic of our society. This is the value that we need to promote, which is the fundamental adherence or fundamental commitment to justice. And this is, by the way, an Islamic value. So if America takes it upon themselves and uses the American Muslim community to project this message of justice, because it is an Islamic value, it is easy for me to stand up in front of a Muslim audience and say, you know what, work with justice, because this is an Islamic value, which means exactly all of the things: due process, giving minority their rights, having any evidence confronted in an open court, no tortures, no secret detentions, give political parties the space to operate.
So do you, as the chairman of CAIR, do you represent Islam?
I represent both America and Islam, because Islam
so you see
is
yourself
a faith,
as a bridge, a liaison,
as
a conduit?
bridge, as a conduit, and we are for the expansion of the rights of the Muslim minority in this country to have their due citizen rights as every other citizen in this country enjoys. Because many of us are first generation, second generation, sometimes third generation Muslims, although Muslims, I'll talk about that a little bit later. The Muslim experience in this country is as old as this country itself. People do not realize that the first Muslims came here with the first slave ships.
That's true.
Because 30%,
Jefferson made reference to Muhammad.
Exactly, 30% of the slaves who came with the first slave ships were Muslims, and there is tremendous evidence of Muslim life that actually flourished or thrived under the system of slavery. But the recent experience of the Muslims, about 60 to 70% of the Muslims come from different countries, post-1960s, after the liberalization of the Immigration Acts. And because they come from so many Muslim countries, probably representing 60 or different Muslim countries around, they have a great deal of empathy from where they come from, but also a great deal of understanding of the people. They also have the language skills and the cultural skills to communicate America's message to those countries and those societies. And that, to me, should be the role of American Muslims today. And the government should engage that group, because it's a resource that is not going to be there forever. There's a limited window of opportunity, because most of us, like myself, I'm a first generation American immigrant. I immigrated to this country as a student, and then I worked, and I am where I am today.
Now, you were born in India?
I was born in India. But for many of us, we still have connections. We have families, and we have the understanding of the culture. My children will probably have that connection and that understanding of that culture, but I'm not sure if their children will have it. So that kind of connection, that kind of empathy remains for the first 2, maybe at most 3 generations. Once that generation fades away, then that bridge is almost gone. So we have to take advantage of the bridge while the bridge still exists.
Well, now let's talk about something a little bit more difficult. I want to first get to the message and how difficult it is to get any effective message across sometimes in America and across the world. But I also want to talk about terrorism as it relates to Islam. Is terrorism religious-based?
No. I mean, there are so many books that have come out. You read Robert Pape's book, Dying to Win. There's a new book by
You didn't even hesitate. Is terrorism religious-based? You said no immediately.
No. There is no religious basis to terrorism, Islamic or otherwise. No religious text, no religious value, to my knowledge, ever has said terrorism is okay. Killing of innocent people is okay. Killing people without due process is okay. I do not find that in any religion. If you look at these scholarly writings that are coming out, like Robert Pape's book, Dying to Win, there's a new book by Louise Richardson called What Terrorists Want. And there are several others that have come out in the last few years. They all have a common conclusion. The number one conclusion is that there is no link between religion and terrorism. Terrorism is not an ideology, which is also a fundamental wrong assumption that the US government has made in its so-called war against terror. Because terrorism, you can have a war against an ideology. You can have a war against Nazism, because that's an evil ideology. But you cannot fight a war against a tactic. Terrorism is a tactic. It's a tactic of, it's a wrong tactic, it's a condemnable tactic, but nonetheless it's a tactic. You have to recognize the problem the way it is. It is the tactic of the disenfranchised, poor, economically, politically marginalized people that are simply trying terrorism to get attention. So terrorism is not going to create any utopian society or anything that the terrorists want. They're simply trying to draw attention to a problem that they feel the world has ignored. Again, as I said, using the tactic or discussing the tactic or the root causes behind the tactic does not condone that tactic. It's a wrong tactic, and people would have to stand up and condemn that tactic.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back I want to follow up on this. From where do they get their impetus, their strength, their power? What is it about them that gives them, in their minds, the authority? A lot of times we hear that that Allah or God has given them the strength in the name of. So let's talk more with Dr. Parvez Ahmed when we come back. You're watching a program called Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley. Take a look at this. We'll be right back.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
In these turbulent times, let us not erode the liberties our country was built on.
Let it shine.
Larry Parker, National Honor Society student. Patricia Stevenson, stockbroker. Hector Desario, systems analyst. Driving while black or brown isn't a crime. If it's happened to you, call us at 1-877-6-PROFILE and arrest the racism.
Welcome back to Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley. We're talking about terrorism, and we're talking with Dr. Parvez Ahmed, the chairman of Council on American Islamic Relations. CAIR is the acronym. And I wanted to get to the authority or perceived authority in the terrorist's mind. What gives them the strength in their own mind and the validity to carry out the horrible acts that are happening? Because in their mind, they're doing this, at least from my perspective and many people's perspective, in the name of.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, their authority, first of all, they do not have authority from the mainstream society. They're not a political group. They're not elected by people. They're not even given their authority by people by saying, you know, you can act on our name. So they are just, you can say, fringe elements. You can say these are vigilantes that have banded together because they perceive a common problem. The problem that we see is that the societies that where they come from, they have been disproportionately affected by a variety of issues, some of them external. The continuous post-colonial experience has been devastating to these societies. Not to mention that the colonial experience itself was devastating, but even the post-colonial experience, which is at least between 50 to 100 years, depending upon which part of the world you're talking about, it has been devastating to this part. Then they have their own internal problem that their societies by and large are ruled by authoritarian regimes that have not expanded or allowed democracy and freedom to evolve. Sometimes those democratic issues or democratic aspirations have been squashed based on support from Western powers, like the US government overthrowing the elected representative in Iran, Mossadegh, and they installed the Shah, which has actually led to the phenomena that we see in Iran today. The violent backlash, the hostage taking, all of this is a repercussion of our action where we overthrew the elected representative in Iran. The same thing in Algeria, where the elected government was repressed by the military regime, overthrown by the military regime with the support of France. So that creates this sense of grievance within the society. And when people do not have economic freedom, they do not have political freedom, they do not have the ability to change their lives, and they perceive that this is due to a combination of external influences and internal political problems, they are now using a tactic. Again, I want to emphasize terrorism is a tactic to draw attention. It's a reprehensible tactic. It's a condemnable tactic.
It's a desperate tactic.
It's a desperate tactic to draw attention. So our response should be not to elevate terrorism to the status of having a war, quote unquote, war against terror. We should isolate terrorism by engaging the rest of the mainstream society. Because if you look at opinion polls in the Muslim world, America today, 90 to 95% of the people from Western Africa to Southeast Asia, a vast swath of land covering almost 40, 50 countries, you're talking about probably 1 billion people around the world. They are saying 90 to 95% are saying that US is not trustworthy. 80% believe that US does not care about human rights. Now that's an alarming statistic. To get 90% of people to agree on anything is alarming. But at the same time, the vast majority of Muslims admire American political freedom. They want freedom of speech. They want freedom of religion. They are assertive of equality of women's rights, that women should have the same legal rights as men. They want dialogue with the West. They do not want confrontation. Well, our problem is we are not engaging them.
Well, this is where you said we have to engage, separate the terrorists from the people.
Exactly.
Is what I heard you say. How?
And you separate the terrorists from the people. You also separate the terrorists from the faith.
It's like the wheat and the chaff. You're trying to do, but the terrorists operate in the night in the cloak of darkness. They don't identify themselves. It's very difficult to do that, I would think. And from what I've learned, some of them are insurgents that are paid by Iran to come into Baghdad and do the work that they're doing in Baghdad with the suicide bombers and the other roadside bombers and the IEDs and all the other stuff that's happening there. How can you identify them in order to separate them?
You do not have to identify. You have to change the conditions. You have to change the ground conditions by working with the rest of the people to expand civil society, to create economic opportunities, to create a sense of hope that things are going to get better. And they will get better if the society engages in this positive relationship, not the negative of terrorism. And that way you will keep on isolating them, because after all, these terrorists are recruiting from the society. And the reason they're being able to recruit, because there is a deep grievance that they're tapping into. The way to overcome this problem—
it's generational.
The way to overcome is you take away the grievance. It's not going to happen in one day, but the problem is we have not begun to even do that. We have not begun to see. Look at our disproportionate spending.
People say we can't negotiate with people.
No, look at our spending. We're spending $8 billion a month on war. How much are we spending on diplomacy? How much are we spending in economic development? How much are we spending in bringing Muslim leaders from around the world to America? By and large, and I participate in State Department International Visitors Program through an organization in Jacksonville called, International Visitor Center of Jacksonville.
Oh, yes.
And they bring international, and I've participated in several of their programs, and you see that when people come and visit America, they have their own stereotypes about America. And how do we change them? By bringing them here. The same thing. I take my students, I work at the University of North Florida, as you know. I take my students on study abroads. And when students go to foreign countries, and I often take them to Europe, even going to Europe is a transformation for them. Not to mention if you take them to the Middle East or to China or India or South America, you will have a great transformative impact on people's
I think
mind.
It's very important for people to get out and see the world and leave Jacksonville and come back if this is their home and they love it, and that's great. But you have to do yourself the service of going out and seeing the rest of the country
society.
And a lot of the world.
We're living in a globalized society. We cannot say, if something happens in remote corner of Thailand, that is an isolated area. It's not isolated anymore.
The world is getting smaller.
The world is getting smaller. The world is getting flat, as in the Thomas Friedman book.
Right. Right. So you're actually encouraging diplomacy, separating the terrorists, isolating them, making them feel disenfranchised, and in your mind that will help bring the hope to the Iraqi people and to the other people of the world who are dealing with terrorists.
Iraq is a very difficult situation. Iraq is there is no doubt in my mind. It is a very difficult situation that cannot just be done by simple solutions. There has to be a variety of effort. But I think the fundamental issue is that the U.S. troops must withdraw from Iraq.
Well, that's the big debate going on, and it has been going on ever since we got there. There was a whole group of people around the country and around the world who said, don't go, don't go, don't go.
Well,
this is the first preemptive war that I know that any president, American president, has enacted.
One of
And
the greatest
there's no
tragedies, one of the greatest tragedies that will be written in American history for centuries. That
Well,
we will look back upon this one of the greatest tragedies of our time.
It's totally contrary to anything called anything that remotely resembles the just war theory. You just don't do what we did,
And
because there was no
we have gone
correlation
into-
between 9/11, or very little
There's
correlation.
nothing to do with-
It
nothing to
just
do with,
didn't. It doesn't make sense.
You know, Saddam
Unless
was a
we're talking
horrible
about war profiteering. That's another
Well,
issue.
that's another issue.
I mean, there are nefarious reasons we can isolate,
Yeah.
I suppose, but those are not the reasons that we're talking about. Do you think we're creating more terrorists than
We are. We are creating the conditions for people that would easily then be able to blend insurgency, terrorism, and the lines are blurred in Iraq between what is insurgency and what is terrorism.
Now,
And what we have also done, what we have not done, is we have not engaged with the regional powers.
what about getting your message out? I mean, Islam. What does the word Islam mean?
Well, it just means submission. It means peace. The word Islam linguistically means peace. It comes
Peace.
from the root word salam, which is actually the greeting that if you when you
Salam
came to,
alaikum,
Salam
right,
alaikum.
right.
It comes from the root word salam, which means peace. And so Islam means peace, but it also, the connotation of Islam is that it is submission to the will of God.
Okay. So in terms of getting your message of peace out, don't you have some difficulty with certain passages in the Quran?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, for example, listen to whoever curses a father or mother shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. That's not from the Quran. That's from Exodus in the Old Testament. But don't you have similar passages in the Quran that people always cite, like kill the infidel?
Yeah, again, any religious text, if you take those texts that you just read in isolation, what would you infer? Should Muslims then now look at those texts and then say, you know what, the entire religion of Christianity is based on those texts? No, because religious scholars in Christianity do not interpret them as blanket check for people to go out and kill anybody they want. So that's the same thing. In every religion, there is an interpretive element of religion. Religion is not exclusively based on the literal reading of the texts. No religion is based on a literal reading of their sacred texts. It is based on the interpretation of what those texts means. Sometimes there are contextual interpretations, sometimes there are historical interpretations, sometimes there are linguistic ways of interpreting something, and that's part of the diversity of religious thought. Because religion is not something that is codified in one time and frozen in time. That's the way it is going to be for all people at all time. Religious practice is an evolving thing.
But at the top of the program, you're talking about civil rights, civil liberties, and being in America being a great thing. And America is a great country, and you acknowledge that. You like being here. It allows any religious organization, denomination to practice their religion. But it also allows people who are non-believers to be here equally and enjoy their life under the laws of America. That's what we have. That's what the Bill of Rights, believers and non-believers alike. You're not about wanting to go kill non-believers, are you?
No.
No, of
No,
course,
that's never. I mean, Islam has ruled, Muslims have ruled, where I come from in India, Muslims ruled India for close to 600 years. And even today in India, Muslims are a minority. So imagine a power during those times where the government and the kings had absolute sovereignty over the people. They could have done whatever they want, including force them to convert to Islam. But they did not.
Well, so many people go through third parties to get their information. So even the mainstream media is considered a third party, and they don't take the time to go to the source. What I would consider to be a source representing the American Islamic relations.
Absolutely.
You are a source. A lot of people will go to, let's say, Fox News, or some people say Fox Propaganda or Foxaganda or whatever. But anytime you go through a third party, you go through their filter.
Absolutely.
You go through their, and sometimes if they have an agenda, they're going to twist, distort, leave things out, and make it the way it isn't, and deliberately change it 180 degrees.
That's why my message to the people that are watching the show or anywhere else is talk to Muslims directly.
Talk to Muslims directly.
Yes.
And we can talk to you because you have a web page. People can review your web page.
CAIR.com.
Say it again?
CAIR.com.
CAIR.com. And this is Dr. Parvez Ahmed. He's the chairman of Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. I encourage you to go to the source and not get your information from third parties, and make up your own minds. You've been watching a program called Civil Discourse. My name is Ken Hurley. Thank you, Doctor. We'll see you next time. That was great. I really appreciate that very much.
That was very fast moving.
You have been watching a public access television program called Civil Discourse, sponsored by the American Civil Liberties Union of Greater Jacksonville, Florida. The ACLU is a private, nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization. Our mission is to protect and advance the civil liberties and civil rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution, especially the principles contained in the Bill of Rights. We want to hear from you. Send us an email, share your views and opinions. If you're interested in appearing on the program, let us know. Friend or foe, we want you on the show. You may contact the ACLU in the following ways. Our telephone number.
Welcome to The Turning Point, a program featuring guests talking about education and literacy on Florida's First Coast. I'm Dr. Gail Florence Kane, president of the DePaul School, and here representing the Jacksonville Literacy Council. My first guest today is Dr. Virginia Hash. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.